episode 70 of the Stomp the Butt Show. I'm your host, Mark Harris, alongside Colton Dodgson, who is the birthday boy. Happy birthday, or is it an almost birthday for you?
Yeah, almost birthday. We got 2 more days. Birthday's on a Friday this year, which
Nice.
I'm really looking forward to. I usually get stuck with like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Can't do too much. So looking forward to the Friday birthday. I always get Super Bowl weekend too, which is nice. Genuinely,
Your two favorite teams.
the least excited that I've been for the Super Bowl in a very long time. I went into the playoffs saying this was my doomsday scenario, Chiefs 49ers, but the state of both of those teams, and I mean, truthfully, the fact that the Niners won both of those games is pretty unreal.
Yeah.
So it just shows that, this was not my year. This was not my NFL season. A team has to win it. And if I guess, dude, like, how are you supposed to choose from these two teams? Like,
oh, you choose the Chiefs. Pretty easy.
You go Chiefs. That's my play of the Super Bowl. I'm going Chiefs money line. I got some props sprinkled in there too, but you got to go Chiefs, man. Unfortunately.
For sure. Well, yeah, we hope Brandon Ayuk has a great game in a losing effort.
Here's my unpopular opinion. I don't care that he's an ASU guy. I can't stand Brandon Ayuk.
Wow.
He annoys me to no end. And it might be the Eagles thing. I might not be – and it's him and Debo. They both kind of do it. They just like – I don't know, man. I don't know. I think it might be the Niners effect, honestly. If he were on a different team, I might feel differently. But
yeah, that's fair.
I just can't stand the Niners, as I'm sure you can't either. And it trickles down to Debo. It trickles down to Brock Purdy too. That's supposed to be a good story, but I just can't. I can't do anything with the Niners. It drives me crazy.
Well, we are in agreement. Well, there's no good way to transition out of this, but we're talking about ASU basketball here, and it's been ugly. Colton, the last time you recorded, because you missed last week, was it after the UCLA USC games, or was it after the Washington game?
No, I want to say it was USC UCLA because I remember talking about the Techs quite a bit.
Okay. So at that point,
Techs, right? Yeah.
Yeah. At that point, I don't know what, we were disappointed with the loss to UCLA and all that. Well, since then, they've just lost 4 games in a row, every single one of them by 9 points or more, capped off by a 15-point loss at home to Cal.
Yeah.
There's just no, this team is just falling apart. And it's just really unraveling. And I just don't know, you mentioned before we were recording, I don't want to watch this team anymore. And that's, it's kind of where a lot of Sun Devil fans are. It's is this what it's just going to be? It's just really bad.
Yeah, I was going to say, we were kind of walking through, you were just mentioning, the 4-game losing streak, which it just shows the volatility of this team and the volatility of this team under Hurley. Anything that they do is so short-lived, right? And that's a double-edged sword because at times their losing ways are kind of short-lived. It's just it's so wavy, it's so streaky because they open up conference play with 4 straight wins against Colorado and Utah, right? And that 4-game winning streak, which those are 2 good Pac-12 teams. And then you come out and you lose to UCLA, Cal, Stanford. They've lost to Oregon was the other team, and Oregon State, actually. That was the 4-game losing streak, right? Oregon State. So I think the thing with those games too, if I'm not mistaken, they come out, maybe Oregon State was the only game where they didn't really come out. I think that game was kind of a blowout from start to finish, right?
They didn't come out well against Oregon State or Cal. Like,
Okay. Right. I
yeah,
think the games that are standing out to me are Oregon was one, Stanford, Washington was another one where you're watching the game and it's kind of close for 60 to 75% of that game, right? And
yeah,
in the case of those three, you're watching a game that's kind of back and forth for a majority. And then you get to the last 15 to 12 minutes of those games and the wheels just come off. I don't know if these guys are out of gas. I don't know what's going on, but they play like a team that is in a majority of these games for a majority of these games, and then just debacle for the last 12 minutes.
yeah,
So I don't really know what goes into that. Maybe it's a coaching thing. Maybe it's a cohesion thing. But at the same time, they have a lot of experience in those tight games, right? Those one score games. And I mean, early in conference play, that's what they were winning, right? With the Cal game, I think the Stanford game was like that too. So they have 5 conference wins, and a lot of them were back and forth. So it's just a very puzzling team. It's a very bizarre team, but it's pretty apropos for a team coached by Bobby Hurley. Like, they're always like this. They're always volatile. They're always streaky. You never really know what you're going to get when they come out to play.
yeah.
And then you had the Jose Perez situation. I don't know if that was Cal or Stanford. I want to say
It
that
was
was Cal.
Cal. Yeah.
Yeah. Where he doesn't play the second half. Is that right? Or maybe he
Yep.
doesn't start the second half, whatever it was. So you're like, what's going on behind the scenes? I mean, it's a tall order. The only thing I'll really say in Bobby Hurley's defense is it's a tall order to have to retool a basketball team every year through your transfer portal, right? I mean, other teams do it. He did it last year,
Right.
and he had some cohesion with guys coming back this year, but it just seems like it's too tall of a task for him this year. Um, and the results haven't been disappointing. They've been pretty unacceptable.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
so that's just kind of how I feel about it. And you mentioned, like, I don't even really want to watch. I didn't watch the Cal game, and that's a noon on Saturday game, right? I mean, I was that this past
This
Saturday?
past Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Disneyland, so that kind of contributed to it. But I was still following games on my phone, and that was one that I just like had no interest in checking on
They didn't have the
because
Pac-12 network at the Star Wars land. Not in the
no,
cantina.
the Cantina didn't have Pac-12 network on. So I couldn't catch
Yeah.
that one, which good thing.
What a
I
shame.
did see, yeah, no, what a shame. I did see more Niners and Chiefs jerseys than I ever want to see again in Disneyland. Um, and you know what? It's just a microcosm of how you can be on top of the world in sports and then in the bottom of the valley in just a year span. So I
That
don't know
is
why I
true.
follow sports, Marcus, but I do, and we're here.
We're tortured poets.
Oh yeah, what's it? The tortured poet society,
The part
writing
I,
our tortured poetry from our private jets.
um yeah.
But she's an icon.
Colton probably has so many burner accounts trashing T Swift just everywhere.
No, no, I hung the cleats up for that for my online troll career.
Yeah. Anyway, back to ASU. You mentioned in what you just said, like this is the Bobby Hurley, like this is typical of his tenure here, and this is like the worst version of it though. Like the
Mhm.
absolute worst. Like this is the worst year that he's had at ASU. This is like the worst
Absolutely.
team that he's had given the like expectations, I guess, and like his first 2 years, there was no transfer portal back then, and it was rebuilding from the Sendek era, and like people kind of understood why it took a while for it took 2 years for ASU to get to the tournament, but it's just it's one thing to lose on the road to Washington and Oregon, excuse me, in games where you like you said, you're in the game for like 60% of the game. It's like a close game back and forth, and then they just kind of pull away. That's one thing. But the loss to UCLA, like we talked about before, and then the loss to Oregon State, Stanford, and Cal, you can't lose all 4 of those games. You just can't.
Right, and lose them in the fashion that they did, because
Yeah.
I think you look at each of those games, the 4 that you mentioned, and they're losing them in different ways. Like
Yep.
they're beating themselves in so many different ways, right? Like with UCLA, you have the 4 techs in the second half, which I mean that's a coaching thing. Like I get it, you're passionate. I obviously we've never been in that position. We've never coached a D1 game from
Right.
the court. So like you can only say so much about keeping your emotions in check. But if you're paid to keep your emotions in check, that's something you need to do, especially in a tight game at home to a team you need to beat, right? And Bobby
Yes.
Hurley and his team weren't capable of doing that. Selabunge had the technical foul too.
It all
And then you got
flows from Hurley. Like if you're I'm not a parent, but if you're a parent and you freak out about everything, don't be surprised if your kid freaks out about everything. Like
right.
it
It kind
all.
of it sets the
Yeah.
precedent that is gonna fly, right? Like, okay, my coach is doing that, I can do that. And
Yeah.
ultimately that was I think that and they missed a couple of those free throws, but they had 5 techs. I think that was a 7 point, something like 7 point swing on just technical foul free throws.
Yeah. I think.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
in this, or maybe it was 4 in the second half, 5 total, whatever it was. Those are points you're giving away, right? And then you have the Oregon State game where they just come out flat and they're
Yep.
down 10 like 3 minutes into the game, 4 minutes into the game. And I'm pretty sure you had the same thing with Cal, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't even much of a game from the jump. And it's like, okay, so now they're losing at the beginning of games versus falling apart at the end of games, like you saw with Oregon and Washington. Like they're losing in so many different ways that it's like, what is the identity of this team? We've always known that any team coached by Bobby Hurley is going to be pretty streaky offensively. But I think what we saw this year that gave us a little more optimism at the beginning of the conference slate was that defensive intensity and all the
Yes.
steals and the way that they were playing on the defensive side. And that was kind of different from what we've seen in years past. And we're like, okay, that's a good sign, right? Um, and then it's just falling apart. It's like it's undisciplined. They don't score. They can't when they're
No.
in a hole. I mean, they've erased deficits, right? But recently, the most recent precedent has shown us like you're not that's not sustainable. You're not going to dig your way out of holes like that all season. Um, but it's I'm kind of at a loss for how to sum it up because it's kind of
Yeah.
mind blowing how you lose. You can lose in 3 different ways, right? And that's a lot to overcome to try to win basketball games.
Yeah. And I mean, I was at the Stanford game last week. They were up. They were up like a good like 10-ish, 8, 10-ish points for most of that game. And then they score 4 points in the final 8 minutes of the game.
Yeah,
And it's like it's something different. Like in Hurley's credit, I guess, is like it's like you plug a hole and then another leak comes up, and then you plug that hole. It's like so I do get it from that standpoint, but like it's still a lot of the same issues. Like I know that they actually do run some stuff, but a lot of times it doesn't look like they're running stuff. And the
mhm,
ill-advised 3-point shots are still there, so that's wasting possessions. And I get that on the flip side, it allows guys to play free, so like there is a yin and yang to it, but like it's just it's just bad. Like it doesn't need to be this bad. And Hurley said something this week. Uh, this is a quote from devilsdigest.com. And this could be taken out of context, but it's like, on what is needed to get better shooters on the team, Hurley. We need better NIL. Well, it's like, okay, does Stanford have better NIL? Does Oregon State have better NIL? Does Cal have better NIL than ASU?
yeah.
You
Well, you're
know,
not losing to
like,
teams that are killing you on NIL. Like,
yeah, that's the thing. Like, I'm sure like TCU has better NIL and Oregon, obviously, like I get it. Like I'm not saying that like NIL doesn't matter, but it's not the only thing. You can't just be like because they have some decent players. Like I bet at the end of the year, some of these guys will transfer out to, decently high regarded schools. And then,
what's crazy about that is there's a good chance if they're transferring out to highly regarded schools, they're going to end up playing in the same conference as ASU because ASU is going into a basketball super conference.
Oh my gosh.
So that's another element to all of this that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. Is there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, when I'm thinking about it, the only teams coming to mind are Cincy or UCF, but I think both of those programs are better than what ASU is going to be.
Cincy definitely is.
Cincy and UCF, I would say, are ahead of ASU if you were going to do a ranking for next year. ASU is going to be the bottom dweller in the Big 12.
Yeah, not in the mix of like the worst teams.
Like objectively,
like the Carolina Panthers this past year, they were clearly the worst, and that's the hanging specter over this season. It's like you don't have another year next year to be like, oh, okay, well we can just kind of run this back next year in the Pac-12, see what happens. No, that's not an option. And I've said on the show in the past, like, the losses don't hurt you as bad in the Big 12 because the conference is good, but you have to be like still a competent team.
You have to win some games.
Like last year, exactly. Like last year's ASU team, had they played in the Big 12, they wouldn't have finished with as good of a record, but they still probably would have gotten into the tournament because they would have been able to win a few games. You know what I'm saying? Like, but this year it's just like
strength of opponents and everything like that.
Yeah, exactly. But this year it wouldn't matter. It would just, I mean, you're getting losing by double digits to Oregon State and Cal. And I mean, Colton, you have of ASU's played 22 games. Of those games, they have Vanderbilt, Stanford, Cal, Utah, Colorado, USC. They have six of those 22 games are wins over power competition teams. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's so bad. And so it's just, and look, I mean, I've defended Hurley. I would, if Hurley leaves after this year, I would defend his tenure as an ASU head coach, because you have to grade him on a curve considering the program,
right?
But that doesn't mean he can just be here forever, And with transferring to a new league, who knows? I'll get into this in a bit, but like, whenever ASU hires an athletic director, I really doubt they're going to want to keep Hurley for a super long time, Yeah. And so it does kind of depend on the timing of when that is. But because we're in February now and there's still no concrete signs of an athletic director. But it's just like, I would be fine with Hurley coming back. But I mean, I'm less fine now than I was. You know what I'm saying? Like, there has to be some level of an improvement. And I just look at the schedule, man. Like, this is the problem. You just had a really bad stretch against a softer sketch in your portion of your schedule. Because tomorrow, or I guess tonight when it goes out, you're at Colorado. That's probably going to be a loss. You're at Utah. Then you're at home against Oregon State. Okay, that should be a win. But at Arizona, host the Washington Schools, those are not easy wins at all. You play Arizona, and then you close out LA. Like, you still have the trip to the mountain schools and 2 more games against Arizona on your schedule. Like, it would be great if they went 1-3 in those games.
At 11-11, like, do they even finish above 500?
I really doubt it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest thing with Hurley, the biggest thing with Hurley too is potentially moving on and whatever else. And obviously the new athletic director is going to be a huge domino to fall with that whenever they ultimately hire somebody. But I think they also ASU needs to look within a little bit and recognize, we've talked about the disadvantages that this basketball program and any basketball coach at the head of this program has quite a bit, right? When it comes to facilities and the arena and
Yeah.
all of the other NIL, whatever else the issue is, all the things that we've talked about. What coach is going to come in and be able to do a better job with the hand that they're dealt? I think in Hurley's defense and to his credit, he's done a pretty good job of embracing this program despite all of the disadvantages, right?
Yeah.
And he's been able to retool and make them competitive. Obviously, we're looking at a down year. I mean, down for any program standards, not just down for ASU.
Yeah.
Especially coming off of what they just did in returning some of the guys that they returned. And I remember when we were looking at the incoming transfers, looking at guys that, made us excited, like Sean Phillips and Adam Miller before everything happened with his eligibility, whatever. It just feels like a massively underachieving team. And that has to fall on coaching. But it's just such a convoluted issue because of all the disadvantages that come with trying to lead this program, disadvantages that are put on you by a university that has set a precedent of not really prioritizing athletics the way that it should, right?
Right. Well, specifically men's basketball. Like,
Right.
yeah. No, and that's why it has yeah, like it's not as easy of a conversation as people make it out to be because of all the inherent disadvantages at ASU. But at the same time, it's like he has been here for 9 years. It's not like he's gotten it's not a fair shake,
100%. 100%.
And the benefit of going to the Big 12 is at least you can say, hey, we're a Big 12 job. You get the opportunity to coach in, the best conference. And maybe like the thing with NIL is like, it can be general. Like if you get a coach that, I don't know, maybe has a good relationship with, who knows how a new coach could affect NIL. So that has to be factored into it as well. But yeah, and I think most ASU fans want this to work with Bobby,
Mm-hmm.
But if you go, I don't know, 14-18 or whatever it would be, 14-16 to close out the year, I don't know, maybe you can hold on to him for one more year, but it does feel like the end is coming near on the Hurley tenure, whether it be this season or the end of next season. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I do think the timing of the athletic director hire will factor into that a little bit. But I think you're absolutely right. Like they just handed him an extension last year, right? Obviously, the old regime did that.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say old regime, I really just mean the old leader, right? Ray Anderson, because a lot of those people who worked for him are still there. But that was obviously handed down by a former leadership. So is Bobby Hurley going to be in favor with the new athletic director? That remains to be seen. But also, I would say your timeline of maybe 1 to 2 more seasons is probably the most realistic given the extension that was just handed down. I keep coming back to you mentioned it's a Big 12 job, and you're absolutely right. But when you're pitching, hey, you're going to come play at a Big 10 school or a Big 12 school to recruits, those are the recruits that probably have offers from the 15 other Big 12 schools that are better than ASU at basketball.
Yeah, no, true.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing with this is there's so much uncertainty given the conference move, given the athletic director situation, given Hurley's, I guess, not rocky, but rocky
Uneven.
isn't the right word at all, but streaky. I think streaky is a good word.
Uneven, yeah.
Uneven. There we go. Tenure as head coach, there's good moments, there's bad moments. there's just so much to consider with this. And there's the state of the basketball team doesn't do him any favors, but you also have to ask, if we were to move on from Hurley, is the person that we bring in going to be definitively better at the job or definitively better after a couple years of settling in? Because I think that would be enough too to
Yeah.
understand that maybe like the future would be brighter if we allowed this coach to get their feet underneath them. It's just so hard to say. I do think that they're going to need a revamped approach to be competitive in the Big 12. And that's not going to be for quite a while. We're going to watch some pretty bad ASU basketball seasons when they get to the Big 12. That's not a that's not being a downer. That's not being pessimistic. That's being realistic. Like the teams, your conference schedule is going to be insane every year against the schools in this conference. So they haven't. I don't know, man. It's gonna be rocky. This is probably gonna be the high point for, and as bad as that sounds, like where we're at right now, I think will be the high point over the next 3 years. That's just kind of how I'm feeling about
That's
the state.
positive right there.
I know.
I don't know
That's
if it's
just
that, but I get your general point.
dude, if they go 500 this season, and I could be wrong. Bobby Hurley has shown to adapt on the fly. If I'm wrong, great. I want to be wrong. I want to enjoy watching this team. I love watching ASU basketball. But they've been the same team with different players, I feel like. I mean, the adjustment this year has been the defense. We talked about that, but it's still a streaky offensive team that doesn't ever seem to have a flow, except for when they're forcing turnovers and getting on the fast break and everything like that. And they're going to a super conference. Like, I don't understand what my outlook is supposed to be on that.
Well, so for me now, now that we're just talking all this out, like it's like with Hurley, like what are we holding on to?
Yeah,
This
no,
is
you're
kind of
right.
as a Seahawks fan, this is how I felt this past year with Pete Carroll. And there were reasons like, oh, like they still went 9-8, like he's a good motivator, all this. But in my head, I'm like, what are we holding on to as Seahawks fans? Like, what's the risk? Like, I would like Mike McDonald may be a bad coach, and the Seahawks go 3-14 next year or whatever. Like, but at least then it's like, okay, then we can take the next step instead of just like being stuck in neutral, which is kind of what you feel like as an ASU bat. It's like, okay, like sure, we could bring back Hurley next year, and he does have a pretty good recruiting class, but it's like, what's it gonna result in?
Right. I think you have to kind of compare what is your realistic best case scenario with any coach? What is your realistic like this would be the best season to watch as an ASU fan? Is it getting to the Sweet 16? Is it
Sweet 16.
making a Final Four appearance? Like what is the
Sweet 16.
realistic ceiling for this program? And I would agree with you. It's winning a couple making the tournament first and foremost, and then winning a couple tournament games and losing in one of those named rounds, right?
Right.
It's probably not the Elite Eight or the Final Four, but Bobby Hurley, is he going to be the guy that gets you there? And I think you're right. It's like, what are we holding on to? The hope of just making the tournament? Because I think this program isn't going to be capable of national championships, but I also don't think it's got to resort to just hoping we make the tournament every year. Right. I think there's some capability there to maybe win a couple tournament games if they get the right guy in that position, if they put together the right roster, develop the right culture, all of these things. Bobby's had, some great moments over 9 years. There's been some fun games to watch, some fun seasons. But I think you're right. Is he the guy that can get them to that point? And 9 years has shown us no, right?
Yeah.
Like, so at what point do you recognize, okay, this is who he is. This is the guy we've got. If he's not going to get us to that threshold of where we think we could realistically be, I don't think anybody's asking for a national championship. At least realistic fans aren't. But having a fun Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of the first weekend isn't too much to ask, I don't
No.
think.
And
so
another thing is like college basketball, like we have spent this show acknowledging like the just the issues with ASU basketball as a program. But it's not like college football where those issues like really hold you back a lot more, than college basketball. Like college basketball you can't like Florida Atlantic was in the Final Four last year and was a shot away from going to the title game. Like weird stuff. Northwestern was a terrible program for years and they beat the crap out of ASU and they're going to go back to the tournament. Like Washington State is probably of all the Pac-12 programs, Washington State's the only one that probably has a worse just history than ASU. And they're having a really good season this year and they might make the tournament. So it's like, that's why, like, for one, Hurley's been here for 9 years. So just that alone, like 9 years is a long time to spend as a coach anywhere. So from that, like maybe Hurley just leaves and takes another job and just to restart his clock. I don't know. But the thing is, he does like coaching ASU, so that has to be factored in. It's just, it does feel like if ASU were like most other, Power 6 schools, high major schools, Hurley this wouldn't even really be a conversation, So I don't know. It's tough. But it does really depend on the next AD. And I actually saw an interesting article on the State Press yesterday that I'll share quickly. So it's Michael Crow. He was talking at the West Campus in just a forum, talked about all sorts of stuff. But the main thing was the athletic director. It was framed on social media that ASU hasn't begun looking for an athletic director, which that's not true. But here's what they reported. ASU President Michael Crow said at a student forum on the West Valley campus Tuesday that the university is, quote, approaching the time frame, quote, to begin appointing a new athletic director nearly 4 months after Ray Anderson left, moderated by so-and-so. Whatever, we want as self-sustaining as possible, integrated unit, like all other units within the university, financial and organizational infrastructure, all this stuff. So basically he's saying the search is going on. But Colton, I sent you this last week from Brad Sesmat.
I do remember seeing this. Yeah.
And I mentioned this on the last show, but I think this is really important when to consider this sentence. A lot of smoke, Dr. Crow will retire from Arizona State in the spring. So you have this holdup with the athletic director. Why is it taking so long? All of this. Well, then there's some level of reporting that's like, hey, there's a lot of rumors that Crow is thinking about retiring, and it kind of makes sense. It's probably, if you're an athletic director, a sitting athletic director somewhere else, you're like, do I want to take the job right now when I don't know who the next president will be? It also, in the State Press story, indicated that Jim Runn, the interim AD, has a good relationship with all the coaches and stuff like that. So that from like a day-to-day aspect, there's not like some urgent need to change things up. From a day, like not from a like big picture, who's going to be the coach, just from like a administrative standpoint.
Right, and if the timeline really is in the spring, I don't know, maybe this is just a reach, but if I'm a director of a university and I'm about to retire in, the spring could be 2 months to 3 months, and I'm about to retire, I don't know how eager I am to start a job search for somebody that I'm going to have to hire and then leave. Like, it just doesn't make sense, especially if he's going to retire, which might be the delay in finding somebody, especially because Rund has a good working relationship with all the coaches. So it's like you said it, there isn't a pressing need to go out and get somebody immediately. So that could be the holdup in this hiring process. I don't know how long it typically takes to hire an athletic director, but I feel like filling a void like that, or having that void not be filled after 4 months seems a little off. Like that doesn't seem like how it would typically work.
No.
You'd at least you'd at least be hearing about candidates. You'd at least be hearing about they're maybe zeroing in on this person. Like even if there's not a hire, there would be some sort of
Yeah.
smoke. In
There's been a
terms
little bit of that out there, but I think it's just you could just kind of factor in the piece from Sesmat, and it just kind of makes sense. It's like, okay, maybe he's just going to have the next president hire the athletic director or whatever. I don't know, but
it makes sense, man. Especially,
yeah,
I mean, you said that Rund has been doing a decent job in the interim. Maintaining those relationships. So if there's not a pressing need, why is Michael Crow gonna put himself through that process in the last 1 to 3 months on the job if he's actually going to retire? Which
yeah.
I would say that Sesmat is a pretty reputable reporter in the Valley. I don't think he's
Oh
the
yeah,
type of guy to put something out like that
no,
if there actually isn't smoke. So I believe that, and I think the the timeline on this athletic director hire is more support that there is truth to that.
yeah,
So
totally. And he knows it. Sesmat knows a bunch of people in the valley. He's been here
yeah,
forever.
If Sesmat is reporting something, that's something that you need to take seriously. It's not some Twitter account throwing it out there. Like
Right.
Sesmat has reported in the Valley for a long time, so
And
he's
it's not
probably hearing that.
yeah, and it's not. It also wasn't framed in some like attention-seeking way.
Right.
It's like it just mixed in the story with everything else. So
It's
that
almost
makes
like in passing, right? Like a
yeah,
footnote.
exactly. Yes, yeah.
Which
So that makes me kind of believe it even more, honestly.
no, I
Um,
agree. I agree. I think there is. We're going to see some movement on that. I mean, we talked about what happened with Doug Franz when he reported that
yeah,
Ray Anderson was going to step down. Obviously, did it way earlier than than the timeline where Anderson was actually on. But everybody refuting that, and Franz standing by it, and ultimately Anderson did step down. So we've seen that precedent sort of set over this era, and maybe we're
right.
coming to the end of that era. And I think this athletic director search might be a pretty big hint that what Sesmat is reporting could be coming to fruition pretty soon.
Yeah. And if you're Hurley, I mean, this might be a great thing for you,
Right.
because there's no one that's there to fire you, and you're already on contract. And he can at least say like, "Hey, I took the team to the tournament last year." You know, he does have that in his back pocket. As bad as things are right now,
Yeah, I don't think there's any shot he doesn't get a new year, or he doesn't get one more year under the new AD.
it might depend on
I
how
feel
the
pretty
season
confident he'll have
finishes.
one more year, but I don't know. I've been wrong before. It just doesn't
Yeah,
make sense, right? Like, because you're right, he does have some of that track record in his back pocket. Maybe the AD comes in and he's like, okay, 9 years, let's give him one more year. He's still under contract. They would have to buy him out. They would have to do all of that, right?
yeah, that's
So,
true. Yeah,
it would make sense financially to just let him play out one year. It wouldn't be like I would say the thing with Hurley is we talked about this being his worst season, right? The worst season that we've seen him coach recently, or whatever we were talking about earlier, with this being one of his worst
yeah.
seasons that we've seen.
Given the
And
circumstances too, because like there was the
right,
COVID. Yeah. Anyway.
but if we're looking at this as one of his worst seasons, and this is sort of the floor for Hurley, I don't think an athletic director is going to be like, "Wow, I made a huge mistake. We went 4-28 or whatever it is," right? Like, I don't think that's a scenario. So I think we'll probably see him for one more year under a new athletic director. The athletic director will make a decision based on that. But he got a 2-year extension, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, that kind of syncs up with the timeline. If they decide to move on, the buyout implications would be a little less demanding, I would assume. So,
Yeah.
I think we get one more year and then we go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it might come down to just how this season finishes. Like, do they have like a respectable end of the season, you know? Or do they continue? Like, what if they win like 2 more games the rest of the year? Then things become different, you know?
Right.
Because, like,
Okay. That's a good point. That's a good point. If he
well, and the
just,
other thing
at that
is,
point, he would have lost the team, right? Like that team
yeah,
is,
exactly.
yeah.
And that, you know, there's a part of me that thinks that might have already happened too. So they're at a
I mean,
very, yeah,
that Jose Perez benching, there could be more to that, right?
yes,
That's
yes.
that's a good point.
And I mean, on a recent show, we were talking about, oh, like, will they hang an NIT championship banner? It's like we were thinking of like, oh, they could still make the NIT, and now that's out the window. Like, or
How
almost.
naive we were after 4 straight conference wins.
I know, yeah. So, well, I asked on the Twitter account, should Bobby Hurley be back as ASU men's basketball coach over the weekend? It was 65.5% no, 34.5% yes. So
How
that
many
kind of
how
that
many votes did we
tracks.
get on that?
What?
How many votes did we get on that?
29.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's not bad.
Yeah. The one
We're
thing that I
trending
do
upward.
is in the negative Hurley category is U of A fans are perfectly fine with him continuing to be the head coach. And that to me, like that might be the most damning thing is when the rival fans are like, "Oh no, you should keep this coach. You guys have to keep him," you know? Like that's that's what I like that's what I say. Like I always joke with our friend Andrew Bell about, oh, I miss the Mike Nolan 49ers, you know, because they were terrible, or the Jim Tom Sula 49ers. Um,
I love the Mike McCarthy Cowboys.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
That exactly. So like I don't know. There's so many things up in the air, but I guess we'll end the basketball conversation with just her like being at ASU is led to a lot of annoying things for Hurley, but it's also a reason why he's more than likely going to coach 10 years at ASU, you know, because you are not held to the stand. Like ASU fans, for the most part, know their lot in life when it comes to the men's basketball program. And so we'll see how
Right.
this, you know, there's a interesting month and a half left just in terms of the short-term future of the program, you know.
They're gonna win the Pac-12 tournament.
Totally.
That's
Yeah.
what's gonna happen.
Yeah, totally. Well, Colton, I know you. What if they actually win the Pac-12 tournament?
I mean, that would just be no. What'll happen is they'll start off against. They'll be a bottom 2 seed in that tournament, right? And the top 4 get
They're
buys.
trending that way.
They'll be a bottom probably 2. So they'll start off with like a Washington State and be up
Yeah.
by 20, and we'll be like, whoa, they're up by 20, or like a Colorado, and they're
Yeah.
up by 20, and we'll be like, wow, they're up by 20. This is really good, and then they'll give up a 26-4 run and lose by 2 points. I don't know if that math checks out. I think it does,
I
but
think it
the
does.
point we make,
Yeah. No.
that's what'll
uh,
happen.
yeah. So that's where ASU basketball, men's basketball is at this point. Um,
Yeah.
it's just yeah, just not good.
No,
And
I don't know how much more of them I'm gonna watch. Just like we had the same issue with football somewhat this year, and I think Ralph put it perfectly when he said the entire season was an exhibition, right? Because they didn't have that bowl eligibility, and once there's no realistic path for your team to do anything outside of winning a Pac-12 tournament or outside of whatever it is, every game, especially in college when there's no like draft implication or anything like that, every game just feels like an exhibition.
It like
And
that's
what's
the
the
only
point of
good thing
watching?
about this. Yeah, the only good thing about this season is that like there's no emotional attachment to it. You
Right.
know, it like when ASU basketball lost dumb games last year. Like remember when they lost to on the road to the Washington schools? Those were annoying, rough losses because it's like you guys are better than this. But
Right.
now I can't even have that emotion. It's like you guys might be better than this, but maybe you're not. And
They had a little Linsanity run to open Pac-12
yeah,
play, and now we're kind of back to earth. That's
the
that's
role,
really
yeah,
the best way I can describe it, I think.
yeah, back to earth with the toughest part of the conference schedule remaining.
Yeah.
So that's fun.